this workshop is really designed to give you the basics of survey design. A lot of what you're going to see, you might recognize already. It might be old news, maybe put in a new way. You might be here today because you are currently writing a survey, or you're trying to get students to write surveys that are better than Halloweenish. You might be here because you recognize that sometimes surveys can be tedious and long, and you want to figure out how to improve it. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. A little bit about survey revision, a little bit about the platforms that we use, just so that you're kind of aware of what we're looking at today. We're going to try and click here. So survey design itself is not as easy as it looks. If you've ever gone through and been like, well, this makes perfect and total sense to me, why doesn't everybody else get it? It's because there are so many features and so many pitfalls that happen with survey design. Today, we're going to be discussing these at the bottom of our screen here. We're going to be discussing why we are interested in survey design, the question types. Question was too big for me to fit in my little space there. Words that we use in our survey, the length of a survey, the order, the question order of a survey, timing, and platform. All of these have a feature to them with an equal or bigger amount of pitfalls that you're going to run into. And like I said, some of this is going to be obvious to you. Some of it might be new. If you have an example, type it into the chat. If you're like, yes, me 100%, raise your hand. I want this to not be just me talking for however long we're going to be meeting for. I would like this to be interactive. So do pop in. For those of you online, if you want to unmute and just be like, yes, I had a situation much like this. Maybe we can work on it together. Maybe we can help refine your survey questions on the fly. That would be great. All right, our first question we're going to talk about today is why? Why should we be worried about survey design? You know, it seems pretty obvious, but if you're not actually thinking about why you're doing a survey, then you're going to run into all sorts of issues. You should be starting your survey knowing what your expected outcomes are. Why would you do this to begin with? Why are you doing it right now? Is it a project? Are you working on a thesis? A lot of people are. Maybe something has happened nationally, internationally that you want feedback on, and it has to happen right now. Is the data already available? So if you are giving a survey for something that's already been discussed, you already have the data for, this is just another thing that you're asking participants to do. It becomes extremely tiresome and burdensome on your participants, and you wind up with bad data. Oh, I have examples in my notes. I'm going back and forth here. One of my examples for the timing, sorry, we're gonna jump all around today, which I tell you not to do later. For the timing, in the past here at USD, we've had major surveys go out. One of them was Board of Regents required. One of them was USD required. And they happened to fall within a 2-week period. And then COVID hit at the same time. So as far as timing goes, for those of you that are administering surveys across campus, recognize that there's a lot that goes on with that timing piece. And also with that data availability. The 2 surveys that we sent out had roughly the same questions, roughly the same information that was going to be collected. But since they were for 2 entities, we had to do them both. It was really exciting for our students. And ask me about our response rates. Yeah, they were really bad. Finally, when you're looking at the why of your surveys, what is your impact? What do you hope to change because of your survey? We ask students in satisfaction surveys, what about USD would you want to change if you could? Why do you think we have all of our new parking lots? Every survey that we sent out said, I'm a distant student, I'm coming from off campus, and I get here and I can't park anywhere. It's extremely frustrating. It's burdensome for them. And because of the survey results, we can then say, we absolutely need more parking lots. So that's one obvious change that has been made simply because of surveys. So we have our pitfalls. If you're not asking why, you're going to wind up with a lot of people being asked to do a lot of surveys that are going to wind up with survey fatigue. I'm not talking about the length of a single survey. I'm talking about being asked to complete 10 surveys a day. Pretty soon, people are just going to say, I'm not going to respond to any of these. I get these right now from my healthcare provider. They're like, tell us how your last visit was. I'm like, no, I am done telling you how my last visit was. It was fine. So yes, even those of us in survey world are sick of getting surveys. It's just the nature of the beast. In fact, people are supplementing their income by responding to surveys. That's how prevalent surveys are in our society. If you have not answered your why, you're going to wind up with bad data. If you can't tell somebody why you should do this survey, you might have good data, but that doesn't answer your question. You might have bad data that you wish answered your question, which is still not useful. You also wind up with low response rates. So if I'm asking 500 people to respond to a survey and I get 10 responses, I can make no generalizable decisions with that. And finally, it could be a huge waste of your time and your energy and your resources. If the data already exists, why would you redo it? If you're looking to generalize something, but you can't, you've wasted a lot of time. If you are offering incentives of some sort and you wind up with bad data, you wasted a lot of money. So really understanding that why you are doing your survey is imperative at the very, very beginning. My favorite phrase in survey world is, you can't fatten a sheep by weighing it all the time. If we are constantly asking people to provide us responses to surveys, but not doing anything about it, or just constantly asking for these little incremental bits, you're not going to see changes and you're not going to allow yourself time to actually grow. So be aware of the amount of surveys that are going out and the why. Make it truly meaningful for people. Our next feature, it's more fun. This is like in a class when you go through like the, what's that called? Like all of your pre-stuff, like this is the history of the thing, all these things. We're moving on to more fun things. So question types. And for those of you online, those of you face-to-face, this is where you get to interact. You should know what question types are. So we're going to play a little game. Here's our first question type. How satisfied are you with the cafeteria food options? What kind of question is this? From a scale of very satisfied to very dissatisfied. It is a
Likert.
Likert. I would throw candy, but it's over there and most of you are online. You're exactly right. This is a Likert scale question. Extra credit points if anybody can tell me who developed the Likert scale question.
Professor Likert.
Likert? Well, thank you. Likert. Fantastic. Rensis Likert, a social psychologist from America. That's exactly right. Our next question. Choose your favorite cafeteria retailer is an example of a multiple choice question. Yes, you got it. Yay, more candy. Next we have, tell us about the cafeteria food. What do you like or dislike? Is a open text. Yes, we have some participation here. That's exactly right. And then finally, what is your gender, race, ethnicity, age, income? Is example of what kind of questions? Demographic questions. You got it. It's important to have a variety of question types in your survey to help with the engagement of your participants. So with our Likert scale questions, it's very fast, very quick. You can ask a bunch of questions within the same scale and your participants will just be able to click right through it or circle, depending on what your modality is. Makes it very quick. The same thing goes for multiple choice. Multiple choice questions are easy because it limits the amount of responses that your participants will have so that you can make quick and easy deductions about whatever it is that they want to do. The open text fields, you get a little bit more of that qualitative piece. You get to have a little bit more of a response to whatever that question is. You get to feel a little bit more about what your respondents are experiencing in whatever your question is. And finally, your demographic questions. Very important to remember. Demographic questions need to come at the end of your survey, and we'll talk about that next within the pitfall area. Because with our pitfalls, the Likert scales, very important to remember that you need to have an even number of positive and negative experiences. I've got up here that same question, but I said super satisfied, very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, and very dissatisfied. If I were going to do this, I would need either another dissatisfied, something or another, or I would have to change that very satisfied over and change that around. You always need an even number of one end to the other. The other thing to watch out for with any survey questions, particularly with Likert scale questions, is ambiguous language. What's better in this, super or very? I mean, I assume it's super, but very also sounds pretty good. So if I don't know exactly which is better or how I'm experiencing this, it's going to be bad and muddled data. Finally, with this, it's important to understand if you're using an online platform, they're going to assign a number to each of your responses. So super satisfied, in this case, corresponds to a 1, and very dissatisfied corresponds to a 5. So if that's not what you intend, if you intend for this to be very satisfied being a 5 and very dissatisfied being a 1, you either have to change it in your platform, rearrange your numbers. But again, we come to what are the outcomes? If you're looking to do any kind of research based off of your survey, which I assume most of you are, making sure that you understand what the differences in that are. In addition to that, it's very important in your surveys not to mix things around. So if you're asking a satisfied to a dissatisfied scale, and then later in your survey, you have another set of questions, don't swap the order around. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward. Unless, of course, you're meaning to do that as like a cognitive check for your participants. Obviously do it that, but it should be very intentional if you are switching back and forth between a satisfied, dissatisfied, agree, disagree, whatever your scale is. Multiple choice is kind of the same issue. Sorry, my popping up on one screen. Thank you, Mark. Same issue with your multiple choice questions. You are limiting what your respondents are going to be able to say. So in this example, I have changed it to an other option with the opportunity to write in, just in case somebody likes something different, or maybe they're like, I don't eat at the cafeteria because I don't have a meal plan. And if you get enough people that are writing in these answers, then you actually be able to develop more of a understanding about whatever your question is too. With your open text or short answer questions, be aware these are much harder to analyze, which is why a lot of people like the Likert and they like the multiple choice, because you're going to get what you're going to get. In here, I have written what is very similar to what I have seen in a lot of surveys. I have people that will write in short answers that have absolutely nothing to do with the survey because they just want to complain. Mostly. Sometimes they want to like praise something, but 98% of the time, they just want to complain about whatever malfeasance they have at that time. So be aware if you're asking people, especially a lot of short answer questions, they take more time. They are harder to analyze, and you may or may not get the right answer. There is a whole series I could do probably just on short answers and quality analysis. Anyway, back on to two screens. Finally, I was going to talk about demographic questions and why they should be at the end. So I'm going to give a really fun example of back, in 2017 or 16, here at USD, we developed a climate survey for the entire campus. There was 3 surveys for students, faculty, and staff. Students, not a big deal. They went through it. That was fine. But when it came to faculty and staff, we asked questions like, what department do you work in? How long have you worked at USD? And what's your gender? And you can imagine for some of those departments, especially the smaller ones, immediately you could have picked out who was who and who responded in what way. That completely voids the anonymity piece. And so we were told in the assessment committee when we were trying to vet this entire, it was a big survey. We were trying to vet it, and our assessment committee said, move it to the end and make every single one of these optional. Because if I'm asked to respond to this at the beginning, I'm not going to answer the rest of your survey at all. And so at the very end of the survey is when we generally ask the demographic questions. Now, caveat to all of these, it all depends on your intent. If what you're looking for in your survey is to do some skip logic or display logic based off of a demographic question, if I need to answer, are you a 39-year-old white female cisgender that likes Chick-fil-A, and I need all of those at the beginning to enter the survey, that is how I've seen a lot of the demographics at the beginning. However, if you're doing a survey on campus where that doesn't play a piece, and answering those demographic questions at the end and making them optional or with an option to write in is going to be best practice. Okay, we're going to move right along. The words that we use in a survey matter, and they matter a lot. Just because you can use big words doesn't mean you should use big words. So here is my example. Considering the most recent 24-hour period on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being very poor and 10 being extremely enraptured, how would you ascribe your sense of well-being? Be as accurate as possible. Versus, how are you doing today? So I had gone through, I tried to make it as obscure as possible, but I have seen questions like this where you think that by saying it in these bigger words, it's actually going to give you better data. I wouldn't know how to ascribe my sense of well-being on a scale of 1 to 10 versus if you actually looked at my survey, you could see my little smiley guy who it was great. I had a lot of fun with that one. So with this, anyone in Office fan, The Office? Yes. So there's a point at which Michael, the boss, is asking about a surplus issue. And he asks his accountant, Oscar, explain it to me like I'm 10. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Surveys should be at an 8th grade reading level.
If Ryan is not receiving like the progress report emails, who is it IT that I need to reach out to? Because there's no like information like.
Hey, Gabrielle.
For this thing? Yes.
Hey, Gabrielle, you're not muted. It's funny. Same thing with this. My first question there came up at a 14.2 grade level. And my second, you would guess, as a 0.5. So recognizing the difference in there. Yes, you could very well ask it somewhere in the middle. You don't have to be as vague as how you doing. And you certainly don't have to be as complex as my first example there. To check these, I would recommend going into, if you have access to Word, go to the Review tab, Spelling and Grammar, Insights. And the Insights will give you this readability statistic. And you can see right here that Flesch-Kincaid grade level. So this was, I did a little test and it said you don't have enough data. So I wrote in my Word document, you don't have enough data. That sentence alone comes up at a 3.6 grade point level. So that's where I would go to kind of find how readable is this? It's going to give you any passive sentences. It's going to give you a lot of detail. So throw your survey into Word, run this quick check just to see once how you're doing. Now, that's not to say that you won't have very big words that you need to ask. For instance, if you are a lawyer and you're sending out an email or a survey to lawyers about lawyer things, there are going to be words that are very obvious for what you're doing. Yes, you can ask that question. This is for a general survey. You're asking maybe college students. Most of you are asking college students or other adults, their perceptions on various pieces. 8th grade reading level is what we're aiming for with that. But beyond that, even more than the words that we use in our surveys are the prompts that we use. So if I'm asking my college students to respond to certain things, I say, you'll now be asked about your experiences in your classes. It's a good prompt. It's like, it puts them in the mindset. We're going to be talking about our classes now. I also have an 11-year-old. So if I was going to ask him and his classmates something, I'm going to say, bet, you're all slaying have mad flex for school. Show us some of the main character energy and answer these questions. It is another way to engage your audience at their level. And yes, I had to Google like every one of those words just to make sure I was using it correctly. And I think I am, but I also don't know. So that's okay. But that is just an example of how you might prompt somebody so that it makes sense for their level. So now we have our pitfalls with our words. We really want to avoid an assumed negative. So an example that I have here would be talking about technology. If I, in my survey, said, how difficult do you find using technology? There is an assumed that technology is difficult to use versus saying, how comfortable are you working with technology? And you can say, oh, I'm really not comfortable working with technology at all versus I love working with technology all the time. Me, I'm right in the middle because I still have to have my 2 screens apparently, so that's fine. Next, we're going to talk about inclusive and all-encompassing responses. So the easiest example I have for this one is talking about maybe a pay range. So if I say, what is your annual income? And I give you 20K to 30K, 30K to 40K, 40K to 50K, so on and so forth. Well, what if I make $40,000 and I'm at that one? Well, which one do I select? Because that is a huge range between one and the other. So it'd be important to go 20K to 29.999K, so on and so forth, to make sure that the answers are inclusive and all-encompassing. Redundancy. Now, this is a sticky one. If you're sending out a survey to just get feedback, it's very maybe simple. Getting a lot of that redundant questioning out is important. I say this is a sticky one because in research design, we use redundancy to do quality checks. So this is really on you. It is really up to your intent for asking a question multiple times. Sometimes it's good to ask a question to make sure that if I say I don't agree with it here, I also don't agree with it here. But asking too many questions leads to much longer surveys, and that leads to survey dropout. It leads to bad data. Again, we don't want to deal with that. Double-barreled questions. Double-barreled questions are basically when you would ask one question expecting 2 responses. The one I have here is, how would you rate your course load and relationship with your instructor? I would rate my course load very, very well, but my instructor is horrible. Especially if you're using a multiple choice question as opposed to a short answer, that one gets a little bit tricky. So always be sure to split the questions if you're asking multiple types of, if you're looking for multiple pieces of data within one question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
with double barreled, is it
Mhm.
okay to do a double barrel question with an open text?
I would say that would be the best way to do a double-barreled question. You sure can, like if it's more of a prompt, like,
Yeah.
hey, we're gonna talk about your courses and your instructor. Give us a little bit of feedback on the course you're taking and your instructor's design of that course. So just a more of a prompt way, yes, I would say an open text would be the way to do a double-barreled question.
Okay.
But when you're looking at a Likert scale or a multiple choice, I don't know, I can't answer that question. Great question. Avoid using jargon. My example here is, which SLO contributes most to your department's success? Do you know what an SLO is? Student learning outcome.
I was gonna say San Luis Obispo, California.
Absolutely, no. But that's a great example because in academic affairs, that would make perfect sense to me. I've written a lot of surveys where they make perfect sense to me because that's my world, I live in it. So instead, always, I'm not saying don't use jargon, but at least define what it is. So in my second example, student learning outcomes, or SLOs, are used to define successful learning for your students. Which of the following SLOs do you find contribute most? And then you would list them out, multiple choice. It's just a much nicer way to have everybody understand the jargon. And I kind of go back to that example of the lawyers again. You can use jargon if your entire population understands what they mean. I'm not saying avoid it at all costs, but do recognize who your participants are. And finally, recognize any generational differences. If I'm telling my participants, log into the app and click on the QR code, very likely I might have participants that are like, what's an app? What's a QR code? What do I do with this? I don't even have a smartphone. Those are all things that you're going to want to watch out for as far as your words and as far as how you're designing your survey. I'm going to check. Oh, thank you. Well, I'm checking the Zoom right now.
I can see your slides just fine.
Okay.
I'm speaking
Okay.
to Arlie and trying to help.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Mark is responding to questions as they come up. Just everybody's still okay? Can see the slides or okay. Awesome. Okay. Moving right along. There we go. Our next feature is the length of your survey. Now, does anyone have a guess as to at what point people really start dropping out of surveys? How long into a survey do most people say I'm out?
Someone said 10 questions.
10 questions?
I would say 30.
30?
I would go 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Mark got it. It's almost like you were there when I was trying to figure this out. 10 minutes. At 10 minutes, we actually, there's data that you see, it just decreases. People stop a survey. Between 10 and 20 is considered that prime survey type. But even then, you start seeing this like, oh, people get really sick of surveys by that point. Then we also look at the number of questions. And here's a graph that I pulled. We have the number of questions on a survey and how many people are dropping out of your survey. So when I talk about the redundancy questions, it is good to have them as a check, but watch out because if you're asking the same thing over and over, people are going to they're going to peace out, they're going to exit, they're not going to complete your survey and you get incomplete data. So we also have, when I talk about the length, I'm going to talk about the prompts that we use in our survey. Sometimes the prompts are overly complicated and people will read through it and they're like, I don't even want to answer the questions because I have no idea what's happening here. So here's an example of a very long prompt. I'm not even going to read it because I got tired writing it. It's great. It gives a good example of what we're doing, but I was able to take out that entire middle section to make it 2 sentences. And it led to the same feel. It led to the same idea. Students, participants, whoever it is, this is students, obviously, would understand what it is that they're expected to do without a paragraph and a half to read. It's important with your length of your survey to maybe run it past somebody that is not going to be a participant. You don't want to sully your data at all, but don't be the only person looking at your survey. Always have somebody else that's an external person, a colleague, go through it a couple times, try to break it. I always say that to people that are trying my surveys, do whatever you can to break it. I'm gonna let you take it like a million times, but select something different every time to make sure it's working. How long did it take you to get through it? Pretend that you are a student, pretend you are a patient in the medical clinic. Get in the mindset and then take it as though you are that person. Where are your pitfalls? Where are the things that I'm not seeing as somebody that's way too close to this project? So then our pitfalls for our length, I've gone through a couple of them already, but we have some new fun terminology. Satisficing, which is a fun word because it's satisfy and suffice. This is when you get to the point of a survey where you're like, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to give you an answer. I satisfied the requirement and that'll suffice, whatever. And so you just start clicking through. I have done this. I don't know how many times because I'm like, it's fine. Like, I just want to be done. So do watch out for, if you have a very long survey, people just clicking through and dropping out. Ooh, we have a lot of dropout rates. Once you get past that 10-minute mark, you're going to see people just piecing out. So if you have great questions at the end of your survey and you're not getting the responses for it, you're going to wind up without the ability to make those generalizable decisions. I'm going to talk about 2 of my favorite friends, skipped logic and display logic. If you're using Qualtrics or another online survey format, but typically I'm referring to Qualtrics because that's what I use most often. Being able to show questions based off of other responses. So if I say, I am a Vermilion resident, well, I'm going to skip this whole section about, well, what is your hometown? What is your all these things? Because I say I'm from Vermilion, I skip to the next section of my survey. The same thing with the display logic. I say I am a Vermilion resident and I get another set of questions that go, okay, so tell us about Prentice Park. Do you go there often? Whereas if I said I'm not a Vermilion resident, I don't know what Prentice Park is, it's going to not display that question for me. So these are ways that you can change the length of your survey without necessarily having to change the survey itself. But do be very aware because I have also seen people misuse skip logic and display logic, where maybe it's skipped to the end of the survey when that's not what they wanted. Or maybe they said you're going to skip, but it still showed up the other questions. So I highly recommend using them, but use them with care. And again, we talk about the redundancy, which I'm not going to be too redundant on it. So I'm going to leave it there because you already know what I'm going to say. And then I can't harp on this again. It's survey fatigue. The longer your surveys, the longer you're asking people to give up their time, the more tired they're going to get about surveys in general, not just yours, but all surveys. Okay. All right, if we've all had a good enough break, I'm going to continue so that we can learn more about survey design. Yay. I had a little laugh with my husband last night going through this. I was like, is it too funny to put the break after you talk about the length of a survey? He's like, yeah. So we were like geeking out over that one. That's exciting. Okay, thank you for coming back. We're gonna keep going, and the next thing we're gonna talk about is question order. So in your survey, is there a logical flow? Oh, I also had really fun with that design. Is there a flow to your survey? Does it make sense? Are there logical processes for why you're asking the questions and when? Sometimes I see surveys where you are asked a bunch of questions about a certain topic, and then you get jumped to something else to go back to that other topic, not by intention, just by people not paying close enough attention to what they are asking. And it reminds me of a Quentin Tarantino movie. We do not want Quentin Tarantino movies in here, unless of course you are doing a survey where you need that jumping around to happen. So that's my fun with one. I did have fun with him. Are you asking a variety of question types? So if you're asking Likert scale questions and multiple choice, this is a way to engage your audience. So the order of those question types is also important. It's very difficult for people to get asked maybe 10 open text questions in a row. It feels like an awful lot of writing. We see the nods. It sometimes feels oppressive. Sometimes you need that, granted. But really question if that is what you want, or if you can ask a multiple choice in the middle, like, hey, this is a check. How you doing? Or if you are trying to make sure that people are still paying attention, you say, select cat from the next series of animals. And this is a way to actually keep them involved with what you're doing with your survey. It might be an innocuous question, but then you can always go through with your data later and go, they didn't select cat. They weren't paying attention. It's another way to actually make sure that your participants are doing what you expect them to do. With your question orders, it's also important to recognize which questions are you going to make mandatory and which are you going to make optional. Most of the time, 90% of the time, 98% of the time, your survey questions should be optional. I'm coming at this from the IRB office, where if you're asking questions of human subjects participants, they should be allowed the option to leave. Sometimes, again, this is an it depends question, but a lot of times there may be questions that are of a sensitive nature, and people should not be forced to answer those questions if they don't want. The other thing with question order I talked about a little earlier are my friends skip logic and display logic, making sure that things flow there so that we don't have too many questions being asked of our participants. They're staying involved, they're staying engaged with your survey. And our pitfalls for question order. Question priming. So say silk 10 times fast.
Silk.
What does a cow drink?
Water.
Water. Oh, that's a fun one. I got Anna at least. Like someone's gonna know these and they're gonna, because they're already primed, right?
Yeah.
So question priming, it's an example of doing or saying something that's gonna influence directly how somebody reacts to a question. So one thing that you might look at, if I'm sending out a survey and my email messaging says, I'm gonna ask you about technology, iPhones, etc. When I have somebody going into that survey and they're an avid iPhone user, they're going to come at that survey thinking about the iPhone. If they're an avid Samsung user, they're going to go, I hate iPhones. And that's going to be exactly where their mindset is. So be aware of that question order. Where are you placing things? Are you wanting people to have an undue influence in how they're responding? Which also leads to leading responses. I do this with my children. Wouldn't it be great if we could all go to the park later? But, oh, you know, we have to clean our rooms. Shoot. Yeah, wouldn't it be great, Mama? We're going to clean our rooms right now. Doesn't happen. But this is another example of a leading response. And how this might look in survey world is, don't you agree that the way we're treated at Chick-fil-A is better than anywhere else on campus? I very clearly wrote this whole presentation very hungry. So there's a lot of references to Chick-fil-A in here. I'm not paid, but I would happily be if they let me. those are just examples of leading responses. It could be even deeper than that, where maybe you're asking about somebody's interaction with their professor, trying to get them to agree that the professor is a good professor in one way, shape, or form, or on the other side, disagree so that it makes them look good or bad. I talked about which questions are required, making sure that you're understanding when a subject should be able to avoid the question, when they should be able to not have to provide an answer, but that's pretty much it for required. Do you have good readability? Is your question order flowy and does it make sense? If I'm talking about Chick-fil-A and I switch gears completely and start talking about, I don't know, politics, that could be a very jarring thing for a survey to just make that shift. So understanding the readability between one thought to the other. And is there consistency? So I talked a little bit earlier about your Likert scale questions, and well, now I'm gonna be really like Likert-y out about that one. So when we talk about, are you having a scale of satisfied to dissatisfied? And then in your next set of questions, you're talking about dissatisfied to satisfied. Making sure that we have that consistency within that question order is going to help your participants still engage with your survey. And along with that, it's understandable. Do they know what they're being asked? Does it make sense to ask that one next? Do your participants feel like they understand the objective? Do they understand the assignment?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it considered best practice to pick either one or the other satisfied first? Is it like typical to start with that first or dissatisfied, or doesn't matter? Because it almost could be leading that way as well.
It could almost be leading that way as well. As far as best practice, I have seen both. I have seen both starting with the dissatisfied and moving to the satisfied, and then the converse. I would say for those people that are using Qualtrics, a lot of times they start with the negative and they end with the positive. So they start with a completely disagree to a completely agree, because that's how the numbering works. They want a low number to equal a low response or a perceived negative response, and a high number to do a perceived positive. And if you do it that way, you don't have to switch your order manually within the question. So I would say, as far as best practice, seen it both ways, but that's why you might see it as a disagree to an agree, or however you want to, your label is for your Likert scale. Anybody else out there have any thoughts on the perceived negatives to the perceived positives? If you think of anything, put it in the chat. Okay, we are going to talk about timing. A lot of this is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we're going to go through it anyway. Is there an event that you need to ask about responses? At the end of today's presentation, I'm going to give you, well, Mark is going to give you in the chat a link to respond to how you felt about today's survey design presentation. I would like the feedback immediately, because you just took this. I want to make sure that the information that you got here was applicable. I want to make sure that if there's anything that you didn't get, that we know it right away, because if I ask you in a week, you might not remember anything. It's just the nature of how things go. Last year, I was the staff chair of TEDx USD, and TEDx requires that you send out a survey to every participant that was there. And so it was, how do we get email addresses and how do we get that sent out in a timely fashion to make sure that we're meeting TEDx's requirements to have our event on campus? So those are just examples of the timing that needs to happen. Now, it could also be that there's something happening within your classroom, sending out a course evaluation, not the IDEA ones, which many of you know, that was my thing for a very long time. But sending out incremental checks. When are you going to send that out? Did you just have a very hard assignment and you want to make sure that your students you have the opportunity to provide feedback before it becomes an issue, like in an IDEA evaluation? So those are examples of timing. Checking the calendar. USD sends out several mass surveys a year within the Office of Academic Affairs. With it, I know the library does one. They're all over the place. We have an internal calendar. It's supposed to be on the portal, but it's not there yet. With all of these big surveys that are going out, so planning around that so that you're not sending something out as we're asking 80 million other questions of our students. So you do get a better response rate and people more willing to take your survey. So consult the calendars, kind of recognize when they are. If you don't know when they are, contact Academic Affairs, my office, and we can kind of help provide a better time frame for when these should go out. And then if you are sending reminders, recognize the time between when you send out your initial ask for your survey. When are you reminding people? Are you reminding them at all? And just being very mindful about when all of that goes out. So that's all part of our timing. Our pitfalls for timing. Survey fatigue. Man, we're just going to bold it now. If you are sending out surveys at the same time as 8 of your colleagues to the same group of people, it's going to be very tiresome for those people. Make sure that you are being very cognizant, very aware of when your surveys are going out and what other surveys are going on. When are you sending this out? You want to send it out right away. You don't want to wait to send out a survey, especially for something like this where I need your feedback, but maybe I do. Maybe I want to, in my research design, I'm going to give you something and I'm going to give you a week and I'm going to come back to you later. So really recognize what your timing is as far as when do you need the data, when do you need the person to respond, and what happens in between those two events. And then what is your modality? Are you sending reminders via email or are you sending them via text? If you're sending them over text message, don't send it at 2 o'clock in the morning. People are going to be really mad because that happens. Also, as far as your timing, are you sending it out on a platform, or do you have access to a platform? Are you sending like EAB, which is something that USD has, or are you doing it specifically through Qualtrics or email? All of those are involved with that timing to make sure that you have access, your participants have access, and everybody can actually get to the survey as they need to. Okay. We're going to talk about platform, and if you look down here, this is my last like big one. We have a couple of others after that, but hold on with me, we're getting there. So USD has a Qualtrics license. For those of you that did not know that, everybody at USD can get a Qualtrics access. There is a really great help desk article for how to, step by step get into Qualtrics. What's great about Qualtrics is that on campus, then you can collaborate with others. You can you set up a lot of these research design items so that you can do your analysis afterwards, which is really great. There are other survey companies, and many of them like Psych Data, SurveyMonkey, Question Pro, Google Forms. Even you can certainly ask the questions on there. Not all of them have the reporting mechanisms that our Qualtrics license does. So that's just a little plug for those of you looking to do research or your students looking to do research, that's a free for you. I mean, it's a USD license, but a free for you survey platform that you can use. It is important to understand also what your participants would be expecting. If they're used to a Qualtrics style platform, that's maybe what you use. If they're used to Google Forms, use a Google Forms. There's no real best way to do this. It all kind of just depends on what your expected outcomes are for that. There's always a paper pencil. Sometimes you get better response rates using this method. When we changed from the paper pencil idea forms in 2016 to the online version, our response rates plummeted significantly. And I went to SGA, I said, why? What happened? And they're like, well, we know we can fill it out online. They tell us to bring our phones. We're all like sitting there, but I just don't do it. When the paper pencil was out, it was almost like, well, they're doing it and I have nothing else to do, so I'm going to do it too. And I was just shocked. I'm like, IDEA is telling us, oh no, they can fill it out anytime. They have 3 weeks, they do the things. And students just didn't do it. So recognizing that, yeah, this is a little bit less technology focused, the paper pencil forms, but you may get some better response rates, maybe more results. It does take a little bit longer to convert things, but paper pencil, still a really good platform to use. You might be doing interviews as part of your survey, recognizing that Zoom is a great and useful tool, as we are on it right now, to be able to meet with participants on an ongoing manner. Also meeting face to face. And that could be also a focus group. So small groups of people is where you could, like this on a Zoom, be able to actually use that as a platform. So the pitfalls of your platforms, bots. If you are issuing a survey and you are offering an incentive, make sure that you have put in place several catches, like the reCAPTCHAs, maybe looking at those little like select cat for your next answer, because people are very wily. If this is an open survey and you're sending it out to thousands of people, people will write a script to respond to your survey 1,000, 1,000,000 times in hopes that they get whatever incentive this is, especially money. This is very labor intensive to figure out who is real and who is not. Do you offer them money afterwards, even if they're not a real response? So do be very aware if you're offering an online survey. Do your participants have access? If you're doing a paper pencil survey, what if they're not there? What if they're not in class that day? What if they can't mail something back readily? Do they have access to your survey? Do they have internet if you're doing an online survey? These are still questions to ask as far as getting your participants engaged. Is your online survey accessible? Do you need to go through the accessibility checks? Which the answer is yes, you do need to go through accessibility checks to make sure that your participants have equal access to your survey. And then what meta information or those little details from an online survey are being kept that maybe would lead to privacy issues. So are you collecting an IP address without even knowing it? Maybe you want to collect an IP address to check for how many responses are coming from the same IP address. So just keep that in mind as you're developing your survey, as you're going through this, that there might be a lot of data that's kept that you didn't even know was there to begin with. Okay. All of this survey design stuff is really comes down to what are your outcomes? And I talked about that earlier. If you're creating surveys, keeping these pieces in mind, you're going to have a much better output, a much better research design in the very end, which is really what it comes down to. You want to have good outcomes. You want to be able to make generalizable results. You want to be able to spend your time, sometimes your money, in good ways. So really keeping the outcomes, what do you want from your survey in mind as you're working through your survey design, as you're working through your question types, your wording, to make sure that all of that effort is put to good use. Not mine to talk about on that one. Okay, here's our little checklist with all of my pretty little pictures. We talked about today the why survey design is important. The question types that you're going to ask, Lickert. Thank you, Mark, for that one. The words that you're using, making sure that it's understandable to your audience, making sure that you keep in mind the length of your survey so that it's appropriate for your survey. We don't want Quentin Tarantino unless you absolutely need Quentin Tarantino type questions. Make sure that it's logical. The timing of your survey, that survey fatigue is no joke. And then really, what platform are you going to administer your survey on? All right. I am at 2:36 and I am at my last slide. So I would like to open it up for questions, and I'm going to have Mark put the link for the survey design. It's in the chat. If you would click on that and go ahead and fill that out. It is a 5-minute quick survey, or you can scan that QR code. It'll take you to the same place. But I'd love to open it up for discussion. If anybody has any questions or any specific questions that they're asking on a survey, and if you would like to share that with us at this time, and we can all talk through it together. Oh, so a question is, did we talk about the survey committee submissions and the approval process? So the academic affairs has a survey policy where if you are administering a survey to a big group of people, so this is not a classroom survey, but this would be, let's say, I'm going to use the library as an example, where they're sending out a survey to the entire university about library services. You actually, there is a form on InfoReady that you need to submit, and it will go to Lisa Bono in Academic Affairs, and I'm still on it too, to make sure that it is within the calendar, that if you need help with question writing, that we can actually provide that assistance to you. But any big survey like that does need to go through Academic Affairs. There are other surveys, let's say for your research with the IRB, that need to be submitted through Cayuse if it's a human subjects research project. So just keeping that in mind as far as like your timing goes, that some of those may need to have another set of eyes. They may need to be approved before they can be submitted. Great question. All right, what other questions do you have for me? If none, I am happy to take questions offline. If you would like to send me an email, I'm still lindsay.hayes@usd.edu until I get my new driver's license. But even then, I'm sure they'll just forward it on to me. You know where to find me. I am in Slagle 10, what's our number, Mark? 105 now. So I moved down the hall from where I used to be. Most people know me in further down the hall, but happy to work through this, to stop by, to meet with you one-on-one. And thank you for coming today. You, at the end of the quick 5-question survey that we have here is a link to other programs that are being put on by the library services. So do check those out, register for those programs. They're going to be talking about R, is that right? Mm-hmm. Is coming up. So how
Power BI is the next one.
Power BI is the next one. So that would be taking the research that you're doing and making it pretty and relatable and understandable to other people. So a great series. I definitely recommend going to these. Registering is helpful for Anna to collect the data. She's getting the surveys data. So feel free to complete the survey for today's talk, and let me know if you have any other questions, and I'll let you go. Thank you. Happy Halloween.